Sveiki visi, kas šį vakarą įsijungė pokalbį su Masonu Crossu. Aš esu Monika Grigutytė. Ir štai pristatant šį autorių, tai Masonas Crossas yra škotų autorius, kuriantis ir gyvenantis Glazge. Jis išgarsėjo trilerių seriją apie agentą Karterį Bleiką, kuris tituluojamas vienu įsimintiniausių pastarųjų dešimtmečių kriminalinės literatūros herojų. Masono Crosso išskirtinis braižas pelnęs jam tarptautinį pripažinimą, tai sugebėjimas laviruoti tarp realistiško, prikaustančio reginio ir 90-ųjų veiksmo filmo vaizdinių. Tai trumpai pristatant knygas, kurias jau išleido Tyto Alba. Tai pirmoje ciklo knygoje Žudymo sezonas pasakojama apie Čikagos snaiperių praminto serijinio žudiko pabėgimą iš kalėjimo likus vos 2 savaitėms iki mirties bausmės vykdymo. Ir FTB nenoromis kreipėsi į patyrusią agentą Karterį Bleiką, prašydami jo pagalbos. O jis kartu su ambicinga specialiaja agente Elena Banner turi kuo greičiau surasti nevaldomą žudiką. Tuo tarpu neseniai išėjusioje knygoje Samarietis pasakojama, kaip Santa Monikos kalnuose randami 3 jaunų moterų lavonai. Šio tyrimo ėmusis detektyvė Jessica Allen supranta, kad tai jau matė prieš 3 metų kitame šalies pakraštyje. Tačiau anuomet tyrimas buvo nutrauktas, o žudikas liko laisvėje. Na ir vėlgi į pagalbą tyrėjams pasisiūlo Karteris Bleikas, netikėtų būdų sugebantis nuspėti žudiko veiksmus. Na ir trečioji šios serijos knyga Metas žudyti pasirodys dar šią vasarą. Iš viso Masonas Crossas parašė 5 knygas apie Karterį Bleiką. So, hello Mason Cross, or Gavin Bell, as you can see you.
Hello.
It's very nice to have you here. For those who don't know, Gavin Bell is writing under the name of Mason Cross. So there is a double name situation in here. So starting, as I just, you have to trust me, I'm afraid of what I told about the books in Lithuanian, but...
It sounded perfect.
That's great. If I'm not mistaken, at first, the plan for the trilogy of Karterį Bleiką books, actually, at first, the plan was to make a trilogy out of Karterį Bleiką books, but later, given that they were so well received, the trilogy actually extended to 5 books already. So what do you have in mind for the Bleik in the nearest future? Do you mean to extend the series further from like the 5 books that are already there?
So the 5 books that are there already, they kind of end on a little bit of a cliffhanger in the 5th book. So I definitely want to go back and write another one later on. The last few books that I've written have been standalones. So there was a couple afterwards that came out in the UK. But I'd like to go back and write another Bleik book, and I've got an idea for one that I've written some of, so it would be good to get a bit of time to go back and pick up with Karterį Bleiką and see how he's doing these days post COVID, hopefully by the time it comes out.
But do you have in mind for the plot for additional book, or do you have in mind like particular number of books? Do you have like a lot planned for him, or it's rather I don't know, rather how it go, how the Karterį Bleiką will let you deal with it later?
Well, I think I came up with the character knowing that I'd be able to drop him into different types of book. So I think I'd thought a lot about it before I wrote the first book, The Killing Season. And I knew I wanted to have a character who I could move around to different places and drop into different types of book. So each Karterį Bleiką book is a slightly different type of thriller, I think. So the first one's kind of a bit more like a Lee Child, straight ahead action thriller, and the second one's a bit more of a police procedural, and the third one is kind of more of a chase thriller. So each time I've been able to do a slightly different sort of feeling book, and that's always kept it interesting to me and hopefully to the reader. So each time I've been able to just take this character and then just put him in a different place with a different supporting cast, and hopefully tell a standalone, self-contained story that people could pick up book number 5 or book number 6, and they would still get a complete story, but with the same character. So I've got a few ideas for future books. So the next one, I'd quite like to do one where he infiltrates like a religious cult. So that'd be kind of an interesting direction to take him to next time.
Mm-hmm. So as I actually, my second question was about the genres that you actually like to experiment, as I understand. Yeah, can you reveal for the readers, because the third book will be released here in Lithuania in the middle of the summer. So can you get a glimpse to us what is fourth, and the fifth book, what kind of genre is that? And what genres mainly are you interested in? It's mainly the thrillers, yes?
Yeah, I love thrillers, I love crime, and I guess that's the kind of book I always grew up reading. So I love the American thrillers by people like Harlan Coben and Lee Child and Michael Connelly, and just back to the classics like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. So I've always liked thrillers and crime. I like other genres as well, like Stephen King, love horror. I like science fiction. I really like comic books. I was always a big sort of fan of Batman and Spider-Man and X-Men growing up, so it'd be cool to write a comic one of these days. But it tends to be it's things that are mysteries, that are crime, that have that have some sort of mystery that has to be solved by the end of the book. So I think that's what I'm drawn to as a reader, and I guess that's why I've been sort of drawn to write that kind of thing as a writer. In terms of the third Karterio Bleiko book, so that was called Winterlong when I was writing it, and in the UK they changed the title to The Time to Kill, so I'm not sure. I think it might be kind of a translation of that that will be in Lithuania. And in that book, it actually picks up a lot of the threads from the first few books, where that Karterio Bleiko has a kind of shadowy background in some sort of military operation, but you don't know too much about it. There's just hints dropped in the first couple of books about it. And in this book, it turns out they used to work for a kind of black ops group in the US military called Winterlong. And in this book, they decide for various reasons that they're going to come after Karterio Bleiko and take him off the map. So he has to make sure he can get a piece of evidence that is going to get them off his back and try and avoid getting killed in the meantime. So it's one of my favorite Bleiko books, and it was the one where I really wrote the kind of book I like to read, where it's a man on the run from lots of bad guys that want to do him harm.
Mm-hmm. That's great. That's something to wait for us. As well, we wanted to ask about the storytelling, which your storytelling is often called highly cinematographic. And I wonder, is it intentional, or it is rather the story itself that dictates such feature of the story?
So yeah, that's something that people quite often say, is that the books feel quite cinematic, which I take as a huge compliment, because I'm a big fan of action movies and thrillers. And it helps me, probably just the way that I write, it helps me to picture what would this look like in a film. What would the location look like? Who would play this character? What sort of music would there be? And that's the way I always sort of develop things in my head as I'm writing. I sort of think as if, what would this look like as a movie? And it always feels like halfway through writing a book, a lot of writers will say this, you kind of hate the book as you're writing it. And there will always come a point halfway through, 2/3 of the way through a book, where I think this book is absolutely terrible, but it would make quite a good movie. So as long as it would make a good movie, that's enough for me to hang on to, and hopefully that if I just get to the end, it will turn out okay somehow.
And obviously it does. And actually shifting to the character, because Karterio Bleiko is a very mysterious character, and given that detective and thriller stories are kind of mysterious without the mysterious character in it, you still decided to make Bleiko very enigmatic. So what were the reasons that encouraged to do that?
Again, I think I've always been attracted to characters that have a bit of mystery about them and a bit of background that you don't necessarily know everything about, but can be revealed over the course of a series of books. And that was something I was quite interested in doing. And I think the first line of the first Bleiko book is, "The first thing you should know about me is my name is not Karterio Bleiko." And I just thought that was kind of a good sort of way of grabbing the reader's attention and making them interested in this guy. And it seems to have worked out okay so far. But yeah, I mean, I just loved reading about those kind of characters, you know, like Jason Bourne, or even, you know, Wolverine in the X-Men comics, where he can't remember everything, but he's got this sort of past that gets revealed gradually. And that's been quite fun, just to drip that information through each of the books. So in each one of them, you find out a little bit more about Blake, and I find out a bit more about him as I write about him, which is good. The other kind of practical thing was it meant I didn't have to know too much about him for the first book. So I started out, he was basically a blank slate. I knew he had sort of skills that would help carry him through the book, but I didn't know everything about his background, apart from a few things that I knew that I could release to the reader as I write the books.
And actually, if I'm not mistaken, Karterio Bleiko is the only one that it talks from first-person perspective. So I suppose that's maybe one of the reason, or not, why he's so mysterious. Because while telling the story out of the third-person perspective, it's kind of easier to describe. Maybe, I don't know, what were actually the reasons for making him talk for himself rather than narrating his thoughts?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I consciously decided to do it that way. I think when I was writing the first few chapters of the book, it seemed kind of natural to write the Blake chapters from, you know, first person, from his point of view, because I think, you know, when you're writing this kind of book, you do see things through the eyes of the protagonist. So it felt quite natural for me to do that. And I'd read quite a few other thrillers that hop between different characters, but stay with the first person for the protagonist. And I guess sort of John Connolly, and I think Harlan Coben does that as well sometimes. So it felt that was quite a good way of setting him apart from the other characters, but letting you sort of see the world the way he does, but without necessarily having to get too into detail about his you know, where he comes from and his background. So it's kind of him in the moment. So it felt sort of quite natural to write about him that way.
And as well, talking about his sidekicks, people he is working with, and the first few books, these are the strong woman characters. So was it intentional or accidental, kind of? And what do you think this adds to the story, actually?
I think it's good to have a balance with the characters that you've got in any story, and I think if you've got a male protagonist, it makes sense to have them contrasting with a female, not sidekick, but sort of co-lead almost. And I hadn't thought too consciously about it, but I think just, you know, given sort of the things that I sort of used to read and watch growing up, it probably came quite naturally, because, you know, I was sort of a kid in the 80s and 90s. So, you know, I like the Terminator and Aliens with really strong female protagonists, but also things like the X-Files, where you've got Dana Scully, and Silence of the Lambs with Jodie Foster, and obviously Buffy. So it just kind of felt natural. And it was only when I'd written 2 or 3 books and people said that they liked the fact there was sort of strong female characters as well as the male protagonist, that I thought, oh yeah, I suppose that sort of it sort of balances the books out to do it that way. It means they're not too male, which is good from kind of commercial point of view, because as you probably know, most people that read books are female. It's something like 70% of crime readers, certainly in the UK and the US, are female. So it doesn't hurt to make sure the books aren't too male, if that makes sense. But I think it just kind of came naturally, and really out of what I like to read and watch as well.
And as well, the plots that you built in Karterio Bleiko are very descriptional of how FBI and U.S. national security system works, etc. It's very detailed. So, what are your sources for finding this information? And do you spend a very long time researching? Probably yes. I figure not.
So, disappointingly, a lot of it is just Googling things. So, so I mean, Google is fantastically useful, and the internet is useful, and it's not just for things like Wikipedia, because if you're setting a book in a particular part of the United States, you can use maps, but you can go into local newspapers, and you can listen to local radio stations and get a feel for the way people talk, and just sort of pick up bits of information that you can use. So with research, I like to do a little bit of research before I write the book, and then do more as I write, as I work out what I need to know. And then also, again, when I'm redrafting, I'll know that there's parts of the book where I've just made something up and I have to go back and find out, how can I make this a bit more plausible? How would this work in real life? But I've had to say, actually, some of the things where people have said that was, really good research you put in there. It's some of the stuff that I've just made up, and think, this sounds like how it might work in real life. And the good thing about writing about kind of secret, sort of top secret military agencies is nobody can definitely say, no, that definitely doesn't happen, because these things are top secret. So you can rely a little bit on the fact that the government is quite secretive, to sort of cover you a little bit.
I believe you have your own sources, maybe, and actually, how do you feel about books being published in quite small countries and small markets, as Lithuania, for instance, and translated into languages that that doesn't have a lot of users?
Well, no, I think it's fantastic to be published anywhere. So, when I was starting out, I was just hoping that somebody anywhere would want to publish my book and to read my book. So the fact that the Bleik books have been sold to a bunch of different countries is fantastic. So it's good to know that you're reaching readers in places that you haven't been, places that you would like to go. So, hopefully someday I can get to Lithuania. But yes, it's always a real buzz to find out that another country has bought one of the books, and then you get to see the different covers and the way they translate the titles, and it's always really interesting to see what they do in different territories, and just see how the different editions look next to each other in the page, and they can be completely different from area to area. So I think it's fantastic. If anybody wants to read my book anywhere in the world, I'm happy about it. So it's it's all good.
And as well, many of your readers, at least in Lithuania, notice that and see that you're writing kind of a freezing curve, because every book in the series seems to be more condensed, even more intriguing than the previous one. So is this growing tension is intentional, or as well does it come naturally, like evolving the characters and storylines?
Yeah, I mean, I think the good thing about writing about one character is you get to see him evolve through the different books. So, as I said, I'd kind of made a conscious decision to have slightly different kinds of books each time, which keeps it interesting. And hopefully that is something that the readers like, that it's not just the same formula for every book. I think, on a technical level, I've found I've started writing shorter chapters as I've written more books. So there's one that came out in the UK this year, which won't be out there yet. That's called Hunted. Has like over 100 chapters, whereas the sort of Bleik books were more like sort of 70 odd chapters. So it's and that's something that the readers have come back to say that they found it difficult to put down, because the short chapters keep the pace up, and each one hopefully ends with a what happens next question. So I think I have probably put more thought into how to keep the reader entertained and gripped throughout a book, because there's a lot of other entertainment options these days. So if somebody's going to sit down with your book and spend hours reading your book, you want to make it a pleasant experience for them, and an exciting experience, I hope.
Okay, and as well, talking about the process of writing, because I read in one of your interviews that they usually tend to write late in the evenings after work, after spending some time with your family. So what would your advice be for maybe young writers who as well are struggling a bit with work, family, or free time? How should they cope? What are your advices?
I think my main advice would be, don't get hung up on having to write lots and lots. So I read a lot of advice where people said you have to write, 2,000 words a day or 1,000 words a day to be a writer, and that always really put me off, because I thought, how am I going to find time to sit down and get 1,000 words out or 2,000 words out, and what if they're no good? And the sort of thing that made a big difference for me was just to focus on getting a little bit of work done every day. And I just, when I was starting out, just tried to write 500 words a day, 6 days a week. And that it doesn't take a long time to write that. You can do that in half an hour. So if you can find a bit of time in between sort of putting the kids to bed, or even commuting to work in the morning, back when people commuted to work, if you can get 500 words down, then it's not a huge amount of time that you're having to spend on that, but it builds up if you can do that every day. So if you did that 6 days a week, that's 3,000 words, and that's 12,000 words a month. And then by the end of a year, you've got the draft of a book. So it was when I sort of broke it down like that in my head and thought, that's quite doable. I just started doing 500 words a day, not worrying too much about how good the words were and just trying to push the story forward. Then that eventually gives you, a full draft of a book that you can go back and work on and polish and make better. So that would be my number one thing, is if you can get 500 words done, or even less, if you can just do a little bit every day, it will build up and you will end up with a book.
So actually do the thing.
Yeah, that's it's the usual advice is just right. Yeah, it's boring, but it's true.
Okay, actually, probably that's it. You have all my questions covered. It was very nice speaking with you, to have you here. And we're actually waiting for the third book, hopefully for the fourth and the fifth as well, and for the next to come.